Captain Sarah Chen stared at the massive alien vessel through the viewport of the UES Defiance. The ship was beautiful in an unsettling way, all flowing curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. It dwarfed their cruiser by at least 10 to 1, its organic hull gleaming with an oily rainbow sheen that hurt to look at directly. "First contact protocol is in effect," she announced to her bridge crew. "Remember, we represent all of humanity today." The Zephyrians had reached out through subspace communications 3 months ago, claiming to be peaceful explorers from the Galactic core. They spoke of trade, knowledge exchange, and mutual prosperity. Earth's politicians had been ecstatic, finally proof that humanity wasn't alone, and better yet, these aliens seemed friendly. "Incoming transmission," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from communications. "They're requesting permission to board." "Granted. Have security escort them to Conference Room Alpha. Full diplomatic honors." The aliens that materialized in the conference room were unlike anything humanity had imagined. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs that moved with liquid grace. Their skin was translucent, revealing a network of glowing veins beneath. Most disturbing were their faces, which seemed to shift and flow like living masks, never quite settling on one expression. "Greetings, humans of Earth," spoke their leader, its voice a harmonious blend of tones that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. "I am Prime Coordinator HFY of the Zephyrian Collective. We come seeking partnership with your young species." Sarah stood and extended her hand in the traditional human greeting. "Welcome aboard, Prime Coordinator. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Space Command." HFY stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment, its flowing features rippling with what might have been confusion or disgust. Then, without warning, it recoiled as if she had offered it a venomous snake. You touch?" HFY's voice carried a note of horror that needed no translation. "You make contact with flesh not of your genetic line?" Sarah's hand hung in the air, confusion spreading across her face. "It's called a handshake. It's a gesture of friendship and respect in human culture." The other Zephyrians began making sounds that could only be described as horrified chittering. HFY's features hardened into something resembling fury, its bioluminescent patterns flashing angry reds and oranges. "Friendship? Respect?" HFY's voice rose to a shriek. "You offer to contaminate our pure genetic essence with your primitive touch. This is the greatest insult possible among the collective. This is a declaration of war." "Wait, what?" Sarah stepped back, her diplomatic training crumbling in the face of this unexpected turn. "It's just a handshake. Every human does this. It's completely normal." "Normal?" HFY's entire body began to glow with rage. "You speak of genetic contamination as normal? Your species is even more savage than our scouts reported. To willingly corrupt the purity of bloodlines through casual contact. It is abomination." The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the situation spiraled out of control. Dr. James Park, the mission's xenobiologist, stepped forward desperately. "Prime Coordinator, please, there's been a misunderstanding. In human culture, physical contact is a sign of trust and friendship. We had no knowledge of your customs regarding genetic purity. Perhaps we can—" "Silence." HFY's voice now carried harmonics that made the bulkheads vibrate. "There can be no excuse for such barbarism. Your captain has committed the unforgivable sin of attempted genetic pollution. By the laws of the collective, this act can only be answered with the complete annihilation of your species." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Annihilation? Over a handshake? Your ignorance does not absolve you, primitive one. The collective has maintained genetic purity for over 50,000 years. We have exterminated 17 species for lesser crimes against the sacred bloodlines. Your handshake is an act of biological warfare that cannot be forgiven or forgotten." The other Zephyrians were now backing toward the conference room exit, their patterns flashing in what seemed to be rapid communication. HFY pointed one elongated finger at Sarah, its translucent skin now glowing white-hot with fury. "Captain Sarah Chen of the primitive Earth species, by your own actions you have declared war upon the Zephyrian collective. When our fleets arrive at your homeworld, remember that it was your contaminated hand that doomed your entire race. Your children will curse your name as they die." "Wait," Sarah called out. But the aliens were already dissolving into streams of light, teleporting back to their ship. Within minutes, the massive vessel was powering up its drives, preparing to leave. Rodriguez looked up from his console, his face pale. "Captain, they're transmitting on all frequencies. It's some kind of declaration. I think they're announcing our location to their entire fleet network. Sarah slumped into her chair, staring at the alien ship as it disappeared into hyperspace. In the space of 5 minutes, she had gone from humanity's first diplomatic contact to apparently triggering an interstellar war over the simple act of offering to shake hands. "Sir," called out Ensign Walsh from the sensor station, her voice shaking. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving toward the Sol system. Estimated time of arrival, 72 hours. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Somehow she had to warn Earth that an alien armada was coming, and the reason for the attack was so absurd that no one would believe it. A handshake. Humanity was about to face extinction because she had tried to shake hands. "Rodriguez, get me a priority channel to Earth Command. Looks like we're going to war over greeting etiquette." She paused, then added grimly, "And someone get me our weapons officer. If they want to annihilate us over a handshake, let's show them what humans do when we're really angry." Captain Sarah Chen stared at the massive alien vessel through the viewport of the UES Defiance. The ship was beautiful in an unsettling way, all flowing curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. It dwarfed their cruiser, by at least 10 to 1, its organic hull gleaming with an oily rainbow sheen that hurt to look at directly. "First contact protocol is in effect," she announced to her bridge crew. "Remember, we represent all of humanity today." The Zephyrians had reached out through subspace communications 3 months ago, claiming to be peaceful explorers from the Galactic core. They spoke of trade, knowledge exchange, and mutual prosperity. Earth's politicians had been ecstatic. Finally, proof that humanity wasn't alone, and better yet, these aliens seemed friendly. "Incoming transmission," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from communications. "They're requesting permission to board." "Granted. Have security escort them to Conference Room Alpha. Full diplomatic honors." The aliens that materialized in the conference room were unlike anything humanity had imagined. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with elongated limbs that moved with liquid grace. Their skin was translucent, revealing a network of glowing veins beneath. Most disturbing were their faces, which seemed to shift and flow like living masks, never quite settling on one expression. "Greetings, humans of Earth," spoke their leader, its voice a harmonious blend of tones that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. "I am Prime Coordinator Vexhai of the Zephyrian Collective. We come seeking partnership with your young species." Sarah stood and extended her hand in the traditional human greeting. "Welcome aboard, Prime Coordinator. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Space Command." Vexhai stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment, its flowing features rippling with what might have been confusion or disgust. Then, without warning, it recoiled as if she had offered it a venomous snake. You touch?" Vexhai's voice carried a note of horror that needed no translation. "You make contact with flesh not of your genetic line?" Sarah's hand hung in the air, confusion spreading across her face. "It's called a handshake. It's a gesture of friendship and respect in human culture." The other Zephyrians began making sounds that could only be described as horrified chittering. Vexhai's features hardened into something resembling fury, its bioluminescent patterns flashing angry reds and oranges. "Friendship? Respect?" Vexhai's voice rose to a shriek. "You offer to contaminate our pure genetic essence with your primitive touch. This is the greatest insult possible among the collective. This is a declaration of war." "Wait, what?" Sarah stepped back, her diplomatic training crumbling in the face of this unexpected turn. "It's just a handshake. Every human does this. It's completely normal." "Normal?" Vexhai's entire body began to glow with rage. "You speak of genetic contamination as normal? Your species is even more savage than our scouts reported. To willingly corrupt the purity of bloodlines through casual contact. It is abomination." The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the situation spiraled out of control. Dr. James Park, the mission's xenobiologist, stepped forward desperately. "Prime Coordinator, please, there's been a misunderstanding. In human culture, physical contact is a sign of trust and friendship. We had no knowledge of your customs regarding genetic purity. Perhaps we can..." "Silence!" Vexhi's voice now carried harmonics that made the bulkheads vibrate. There can be no excuse for such barbarism. Your captain has committed the unforgivable sin of attempted genetic pollution. By the laws of the I, Collective, this act can only be answered with the complete annihilation of your species. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Annihilation? Over a handshake? Your ignorance does not absolve you, primitive one. The Collective has maintained genetic purity for over 50,000 years. We have exterminated 17 species for lesser crimes against the sacred bloodlines. Your handshake is an act of biological warfare that cannot be forgiven or forgotten. The other Zephyrians were now backing toward the conference room exit, their patterns flashing in what seemed to be rapid communication. Vexhi pointed one elongated finger at Sarah, its translucent skin now glowing white-hot with fury. Captain Sarah Chen of the primitive Earth species, by your own actions you have declared war upon the Zephyrian Collective. When our fleets arrive at your homeworld, remember that it was your contaminated hand that doomed your entire race. Your children will curse your name as they die. Wait, Sarah called out. But the aliens were already dissolving into streams of light, teleporting back to their ship. Within minutes, the massive vessel was powering up its drives, preparing to leave. Rodriguez looked up from his console, his face pale. Captain, they're transmitting on all frequencies. It's some kind of declaration. I think they're announcing our location to their entire fleet network. Sarah slumped into her chair, staring at the alien ship as it disappeared into hyperspace. In the space of 5 minutes, she had gone from humanity's first diplomatic contact to apparently triggering an interstellar war over the simple act of offering to shake hands. Sir, called out Ensign Walsh from the sensor station, her voice shaking. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving toward the Sol system. Estimated time of arrival, 72 hours. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Somehow she had to warn Earth that an alien armada was coming. And the reason for the attack was so absurd that no one would believe it. A handshake. Humanity Admiral Marcus Thompson stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Council, his weathered face grim as he delivered the most bizarre military briefing in human history. The holographic display behind him showed long-range sensor data of the approaching Zephyrian fleet, hundreds of massive bioships moving through space like a swarm of angry hornets. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said President Elena Vasquez, her voice tight with disbelief. We're facing an invasion because Captain Chen offered to shake hands with an alien? That's the situation, Madam President, Thompson replied. According to their transmission, the Zephyrians view any physical contact between non-relatives as a form of genetic contamination. To them, a handshake is equivalent to biological warfare. Councillor Wei from the Asian Federation shook his head in amazement. 50,000 years of genetic isolation? No wonder they reacted so violently. Their entire society is built around this concept of bloodline purity. The how and why don't matter now, interrupted General Patricia Hayes from Earth Defense Command. What matters is that we have approximately 60 hours before their fleet reaches Earth orbit. Our intelligence suggests they're bringing enough firepower to glass the entire planet. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Earth's leading xenobiologist, leaned forward in her chair. We need to understand their psychology if we're going to fight them effectively. A species that maintains perfect genetic isolation for 50 millennia would view our casual physical contact as absolutely horrifying. Imagine if someone tried to force you to drink poison every time you met them. So what you're saying is that every human interaction is an act of war to these creatures? Asked President Vasquez. Essentially, yes, but there's more. Dr. Reeves activated her own holographic display, showing detailed scans of the Zephyrian ship. Their technology is entirely biological. Those ships aren't built, they're grown. Their weapons, their armor, their propulsion systems, all of it is living tissue carefully engineered over thousands of generations. Admiral Thompson studied the data with a strategist's eye. Biological technology has advantages, but it also has weaknesses. Living systems can be poisoned, infected, or turned against themselves. Exactly, Dr. Reeves nodded. But here's what's really interesting. Our preliminary scans suggest their immune systems are incredibly weak. 50,000 years of genetic isolation means they've never had to deal with foreign pathogens. A common cold virus might be lethal to them. President Vasquez sat back in her chair, processing the implications. Are you suggesting we use biological warfare against them? Not warfare, corrected Dr. Reeves. Defense. We don't need to attack them with engineered plagues. Human beings are walking biological weapon platforms to a species with no immune system diversity. Our skin bacteria, our breath, even our presence in the same room could be devastating to them. General Hayes was already running calculations in her head. If physical proximity is dangerous to them, it explains their reaction to the handshake. They weren't just offended, they were genuinely terrified. But they're still coming to destroy us, pointed out Counselor Way. Terror or not, they're committed to genocide. Admiral Thompson activated the tactical display showing Earth's defensive positions. Our conventional weapons are impressive by human standards, but their fleet outmasses us 50-1. We need to think asymmetrically. What's our strategic advantage? Asked President Vasquez. Adaptability, Thompson replied without hesitation. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands about to face extinction because she had tried to shake hands. Rodriguez, get me a priority channel to Earth Command. Looks like we're going to war over greeting etiquette. She paused, then added grimly, and someone get me our weapons officer. If they want to annihilate us over a handshake, let's show them what humans do when we're really... The Zephyrian armada emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made manifest. 300 bioships materialized at the edge of the Sol system, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent bioluminescence. Each vessel was a work of living art, grown rather than built, with sweeping curves that suggested predatory sea creatures magnified to impossible size. Captain Sarah Chen watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as the alien fleet arranged itself in perfect formation. The precision was unsettling, as if the ships shared a collective consciousness, which, according to Dr. Reeves's briefings, they probably did. Sensor readings coming in, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez. Individual ship masses range from 500,000 to 2 million tons. Energy signatures are unusual. It's like their reading is both mechanical and biological simultaneously. Because they are, Chen replied grimly. Every one of those ships is a living organism, bred and trained for war. We're not just fighting a fleet, we're fighting a pack of spaceborne predators. The human defensive fleet looked pathetically small in comparison. 50 ships of various classes, hastily assembled from military vessels and armed civilian craft. The orbital defense platforms hung motionless around Earth like metal flowers, their weapons powered up and ready. It wasn't nearly enough. Incoming transmission from the lead ship, Rodriguez announced. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, revealing Prime Coordinator Vexhai in all its terrible glory. The Zephyrian's translucent features were rigid with righteous fury, its internal lighting patterns flashing in rapid, angry sequences. Humans of the contaminated world. Vexhai's voice resonated through the bridge with harmonic overtones that made everyone's teeth ache. We have come to cleanse the galaxy of your genetic pollution. Your species has committed the ultimate crime against the sanctity of pure bloodlines. Your extinction will serve as a warning to others who might consider such barbarism. Chen stepped forward, her expression defiant. Prime Coordinator, I'm the one who offered the handshake. Your quarrel is with me, not with the billions of innocent people on Earth. Let's settle this between our ships. Vexhai's features rippled with what might have been amusement. Innocent? Your entire species practices the abomination of genetic mixing. We have observed your mating rituals, your casual physical contact, your complete disregard for bloodline purity. You are all guilty of crimes against nature itself. Our diversity is our strength, Chen shot back. We don't hide behind genetic isolation like cowards. We embrace differences and grow stronger because of them. Strength? Vexhai's voice rose to a shriek that made the speakers crackle. You call contamination strength? Your primitive understanding of genetics would be laughable if it weren't so horrifying. The collective has achieved perfection through 50,000 years of careful breeding. Every Zephyrian is genetically optimized for their role in society. We have eliminated weakness, disease, and genetic deviation. Dr. Park, who had been monitoring the transmission from the science station, spoke up. And in doing so, you've eliminated your ability to adapt. Perfect genetic uniformity is evolutionary suicide. HFY turned its attention to the xenobiologist, its bioluminescent patterns flashing dangerously. Adaptation is chaos. Perfection is eternal. Your contaminated genome will be purged from existence and the galaxy will be cleaner for it. You're going to commit genocide over a handshake, Chen said, her voice heavy with disgust. 50 billion humans are going to die because you can't handle the idea of genetic diversity. Not genocide, HFY corrected coldly. Sterilization. We are cleaning a wound in the fabric of genetic order. Your deaths will prevent the spread of your contamination to other species. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Chen turned to her communications officer. Rodriguez, patch me through to all ships in the defense fleet. Channel open, Captain. Chen took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might be the last she ever spoke to her fellow humans. All ships, this is Captain Chen aboard the Defiance. You've all heard the aliens' demands. They want to exterminate our entire species because we shake hands when we meet, because we hug our children, because we kiss the people we love. She paused, letting the absurdity of it sink in. They call us contaminated. They call our diversity a crime against nature. Well, I say they're right about one thing: we are contaminated. We're contaminated with courage, with adaptability, with the will to survive against impossible odds. Our genetic diversity isn't our weakness, it's our greatest weapon. Through the viewports, the first waves of Zephyrian fighters were already launching from the bioships. Sleek, organic craft that moved through space like living creatures, their weapon pods glowing with contained energy. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for the right of all species to choose their own evolutionary path, Chen continued. These aliens want genetic purity? Let's show them what impure, contaminated, genetically diverse humans can do when we're backed into a corner. The tactical display, lit up with incoming threats as the Zephyrian attack force spread out in a perfect spherical formation around Earth. Their strategy was clearly to surround the planet and systematically destroy every human ship and orbital installation before moving. In for the final strike. All ships engage at will, Chen ordered. Remember, these are biological entities. Target their life support systems, their organic weak points. Dr. Reeves was right, proximity is our advantage. Get in close and make them pay for every inch. The UES Defiance surged forward along with the rest of the human fleet, racing toward an enemy that outnumbered them 6-1. But as Chen watched her tactical display, she noticed something interesting. The Zephyrian formation was maintaining unusually wide spacing between ships. They weren't clustering together for mutual support like human tactical doctrine would suggest. They're afraid, she realized aloud. Even now, even in the middle of attacking us, they're maintaining distance from each other. Their terror of contamination is so deep it affects their battle formations. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his console. Captain, if they can't even trust each other to maintain close formation, how are they going to handle boarding actions? Chen smiled grimly as the first human missiles streaked toward the alien fleet. I guess we're about to find out. All ships prepare for close quarters combat. Let's give these genetically pure cowards something to really be afraid of. The first human ship to make contact with the Zephyrian fleet was the frigate UES Ranger, commanded by Captain Maria Santos. As her vessel closed to boarding range with the Zephyrian destroyer, Santos noticed something that confirmed Dr. Reeves's theories in the most dramatic way possible. Captain, called out her sensor operator, the alien ship is venting atmosphere. They're sterilizing their own hull. Santos watched in amazement as the Zephyrian vessel sprayed clouds of what appeared to be disinfectant into space around itself, creating a chemical barrier between the two ships. The aliens were so terrified of contamination that they were literally trying to sanitize the vacuum of space. Launch boarding pods, Santos ordered. Full contact protocol. I want every Marine who gets aboard that ship to shake hands with an alien. The boarding pods punched through the Zephyrian ship's hull with cutting charges, and Santos could hear the screams of her Marines through the comm system. But these weren't screams of pain or fear. They were screams of battle fury mixed with laughter. Captain Santos, came the voice of Sergeant Williams over the radio. You need to see this. These aliens are dropping like flies just from being in the same room with us. I swear one of them fainted when Private Jenkins sneezed. Through the helmet cameras of her boarding party, Santos watched the most one-sided battle in human history. The Zephyrians, despite their advanced technology and larger size, were completely helpless against the mere presence of humans. Their translucent skin was breaking out in what looked like severe allergic reactions, just from breathing the same air as the Marines. "They're not even trying to fight," reported Corporal Martinez. "They're just running away and screaming about contamination." One of them threw up when I accidentally brushed against it. Dr. Sarah Kim, the fleet's chief medical officer aboard the command ship, was monitoring the biological readings from the boarding action. "This is incredible," she announced over the fleet channel. "The Zephyrians are experiencing systemic biological shock from exposure to human bacteria. Their immune systems have no defense against even the most basic microorganisms that we carry naturally." Captain Chen's voice crackled through the communications network. "All ships, you heard the doctor. Change tactics. Forget the weapons, use yourselves. These aliens can't handle being near us." Across the battlefield, human ships began implementing the most unusual military strategy in history. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, they actively sought to get as close as possible to the alien vessels. Boarding actions became the primary tactic, with human Marines literally walking onto enemy ships and watching their opponents collapse from biological shock. Lieutenant Commander Jackson aboard the destroyer UES Wolverine reported an almost surreal encounter. "We've taken control of their bridge," he announced. The Zephyrian commander started convulsing when my chief petty officer offered him a stick of chewing gum. "I think they've convinced themselves that everything humans touch becomes a biological weapon." The psychological impact was even more devastating than the biological effects. The Zephyrians, who had spent 50,000 years in genetic isolation, were confronting their deepest fears made manifest. To them, humans weren't just enemies. They were walking nightmares that turned reality itself into a contaminated wasteland. Prime Coordinator Vexa High's voice burst across all frequencies, no longer harmonious but shrill with panic. "Fall back! Fall back! The contamination is spreading faster than predicted. These creatures weaponize their very existence." Dr. Kim was recording everything for posterity. "What we're witnessing is the complete breakdown of an entire species' worldview," she explained to the fleet commanders. "Imagine if your most fundamental belief about reality was suddenly proven not just wrong, but catastrophically dangerous. That's what's happening to them right now." The Zephyrian retreat began within the first hour of close combat. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before were now desperately trying to put distance between themselves and the human fleet. Their perfect formations dissolved into chaotic flight patterns as panic spread through their ranks. But the humans weren't content to simply drive them off. Boarding parties had discovered that Zephyrian technology was even more vulnerable than their biology. The living ships themselves were reacting to human presence like organisms experiencing anaphylactic shock. Weapon systems were shutting down, life support was failing, and entire sections of ships were going into biological hibernation to avoid contamination. "This is unbelievable," reported Captain Santos as her boarding party explored the Zephyrian destroyer. "The ship itself is afraid of us. The walls are literally recoiling when we touch them. It's like the entire vessel is one giant organism having an allergic reaction to humans." The boarding party had discovered something even more shocking. The Zephyrian crew wasn't just afraid of physical contact with humans. They were afraid of anything humans had touched. Equipment that Marines had handled became unusable to the aliens. Food that had been in the same room as humans was considered contaminated beyond salvation. "Captain Chen," came Dr. Kim's excited voice over the communications channel. "I'm getting reports from all boarding parties. The Zephyrians aren't just biologically vulnerable to us. They're psychologically incapable of functioning in our presence. 50,000 years of genetic isolation has created a species-wide phobia of contamination so severe that proximity to humans causes complete system shutdown." Chen's response was grimly satisfied. "Then let's give them all the proximity they can handle. All ships pursue the retreating enemy. Board every vessel you can catch. Show them what contaminated humans can do when we really try." The chase continued for several hours as human ships hunted down fleeing Zephyrian vessels. Each boarding action ended the same way. Zephyrian crews abandoning their ships rather than face prolonged exposure to human contamination. By the end of the battle, the human fleet had captured more enemy vessels than they had destroyed. As the last Zephyrian ships fled toward the edge of the solar system, Captain Chen surveyed the battlefield. Dozens of abandoned bioships drifted in space, their crews either dead from biological shock or fled in escape pods. The most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever seen had been defeated not by superior weapons or tactics, but by the simple fact that humans existed in a way that was fundamentally incompatible with Zephyrian psychology. Fleet Command, Chen reported. This is Captain Chen aboard the Defiance. The alien fleet has been neutralized. Total human casualties, 17 injured, 0 killed. Enemy casualties unknown but estimated in the thousands from biological shock alone. Requesting salvage teams to secure the abandoned vessels. She paused, looking out at the drifting bioships. And someone get me a direct line to Prime Coordinator HFY. I think it's time we had another conversation about contamination. Prime Coordinator HFY materialized on the bridge of the UES Defiance as a holographic projection, its translucent form flickering with patterns of defeat and confusion. The once proud alien leader looked diminished, its bioluminescent displays dim and erratic. Even through the safety of a hologram, it seemed to recoil from the human presence surrounding it. You wish to speak, Contaminator, HFY said, its harmonious voice now cracked and strained. Though I cannot fathom what words could pass between our species after what has transpired. Captain Chen stood before the projection, no longer the diplomatic officer trying to make a good first impression. She was now a warrior who had just defended her species from extinction, and her expression showed it. I want to understand, Chen said simply. Help me comprehend how an entire galactic civilization could become so terrified of biological diversity that they'd commit genocide over a handshake. HFY's features rippled with what might have been painful memory. You cannot understand. Your species wallows in genetic chaos like primitive beasts. You have no concept of the purity we have achieved. Purity? Dr. Park stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. You call genetic stagnation purity? Do you have any idea what you've done to yourselves? We have eliminated weakness, HFY replied, but there was less conviction in its voice than before. Disease, genetic defects, random mutations, all the chaos that plagued our ancestors has been bred out of existence. Dr. Kim, who had been analyzing the biological samples from the captured ships, activated her holographic display. Prime Coordinator, with respect, you haven't eliminated weakness. You've eliminated your ability to handle any change whatsoever. Your immune systems are so specialized that they can't cope with any foreign organism, no matter how harmless. The alien leader stared at the genetic analysis scrolling past on the display. These readings, they cannot be accurate. Our genetic lines have been perfected over 50 millennia. They're accurate, Dr. Kim confirmed. Your species has achieved something that most biologists thought was impossible. Complete genetic uniformity across an entire population. Every Zephyrian is essentially an identical clone with minor cosmetic variations. As it should be, HFY said, but its bioluminescent patterns were showing signs of uncertainty. Genetic unity creates social harmony. When all members of a species share identical genetic imperatives, there can be no conflict born of biological differences. Chen felt a chill as the implication sank in. You're not just talking about racial purity, are you? You're talking about the complete elimination of individual genetic variation. Every Zephyrian is genetically programmed to be exactly the same. We are perfected, HFY insisted. But the statement sounded hollow even to its own ears. The chaos of genetic diversity has been replaced with the harmony of unified purpose. Dr. Park was studying the data with growing horror. This is beyond selective breeding. This is active genetic suppression on a species-wide scale. How many generations did it take to achieve this level of uniformity? Approximately 2,000 generations, HFY replied with what might have been pride. The Great Purification eliminated all random genetic elements from our species. We sacrificed the primitive chaos of biological diversity for the perfection of genetic unity. And what did you do with the Zephyrians who didn't fit the genetic template? Chen asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer. Enough. Dr. Kim's expression grew pale as she realized the magnitude of what the Zephyrians had done to themselves. You didn't just breed for genetic uniformity, she whispered. You exterminated every member of your species who showed genetic variation. For 2,000 generations, you systematically murdered anyone who was different. HFY's form flickered with patterns that could only be interpreted as defensive anger. It was not murder. It was genetic cleansing. The impure were prevented from contaminating the perfected bloodlines. Their sacrifice ensured the genetic paradise we achieved. Paradise? Chen's voice was thick with disgust. You turned yourselves into genetic prisoners. No wonder you can't handle exposure to other species. You've eliminated your ability to adapt to anything that doesn't match your perfect template. But that's not the worst part, Dr. Park added, his voice heavy with scientific horror. Genetic uniformity on this scale means you've lost the ability to evolve. If your environment changes even slightly, your entire species could go extinct. Vex-High's bioluminescent patterns began flashing in rapid, panicked sequences. Impossible. Our genetic perfection makes us immune to environmental pressures. We have conquered evolution itself. You've made yourselves evolution slaves, Dr. Kim corrected. Genetic diversity isn't chaos, it's insurance. When environmental pressures change, diverse populations have individuals who can survive and adapt. Uniform populations die. The alien leader was silent for a long moment, its patterns dim and confused. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The great purification was guided by our finest genetic scientists. They assured us that perfection was achievable through the elimination of random genetic elements. Your scientists were wrong, Chen said bluntly. They created a genetic dead end. Your species is living on borrowed time, and any significant environmental change will kill you all. Dr. Park activated another display showing evolutionary models. Look at this projection, Prime Coordinator. If your genetic uniformity is as complete as our scans suggest, your species has perhaps a few thousand years before accumulated genetic defects cause total reproductive failure. Vex-High stared at the projections with growing horror. These calculations, they suggest that genetic perfection leads to genetic death. Not perfection, Dr. Kim corrected gently. Genetic perfection is a myth. What you've achieved is genetic suicide spread out over thousands of years. The implications were finally sinking in for the alien leader. Its entire worldview, built on 50,000 years of genetic isolation and purification, was crumbling before its eyes. If what you say is true, Vex-High said slowly, then the collective has spent millennia destroying itself in the name of genetic purity. It's true, Chen confirmed, and it explains why you reacted so violently to our handshake. You're not just afraid of genetic contamination, you're afraid of genetic salvation. Contact with other species might be the only thing that can save the Zephyrians from extinction. Vex-High's form began to flicker more rapidly, its patterns showing what could only be described as existential crisis. The contamination we feared, it might be the cure for our genetic stagnation? It's not contamination, Chen said firmly. It's life. Messy, chaotic, unpredictable life that adapts and survives and grows stronger through diversity. The alien leader was quiet for a long time, processing concepts that challenged 50,000 years of species-wide conditioning. When it finally spoke, its voice was barely audible. We have made a terrible mistake. The revelation of their genetic predicament sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian collective that could be felt across star systems. Within hours of Vex-High's conversation with the human fleet, emergency transmissions were racing between Zephyrian worlds as the implications of their genetic perfection became clear. Captain Chen found herself in the unprecedented position of conducting negotiations with a species that had just discovered their entire civilization was built on a foundation of slow suicide. The follow-up communications from the Zephyrian fleet painted a picture of a society in complete ideological collapse. The Genetic Council is in emergency session, Vex-High reported during their second holographic meeting. Its bioluminescent patterns were chaotic, shifting between colors that Dr. Kim had identified as representing confusion, fear, and desperate hope. Your revelations have created discord among the collective. Discord? Chen asked. I thought you said genetic uniformity eliminated conflict. It should have, Vex-High replied, its voice carrying notes of bewilderment. But the prospect of species extinction has awakened something we thought we had bred out of our people. Individual thought. Personal fear. The desire for survival that transcends genetic programming. Dr. Park leaned forward with interest. You're developing individual personalities in response to an existential crisis. That's remarkable. The genetic programming that enforced conformity is breaking down under stress. It is terrifying, Vex-High admitted. For 50,000 years, every Zephyrian has known exactly what to think, how to feel, what actions to take. Our genetic unity provided certainty. Now faced with evidence that our perfection is actually our doom, individual Zephyrians are beginning to question everything. The implications were staggering. An entire galactic civilization was experiencing something like a species-wide identity crisis, all triggered by the revelation that their greatest achievement was their greatest failure. "What are your options?" Chen asked. HFY's patterns shifted to what Dr. Kim had identified as profound uncertainty. The Genetic Council has presented 3 possible paths. First, we could continue as we are, accepting extinction in perhaps 3,000 years rather than compromise our genetic purity. That's not really an option, Dr. Park pointed out. That's just slow species suicide. The second option, HFY continued, is to seek genetic diversity through contact with other species. To deliberately contaminate ourselves with foreign genetic material in hopes of restoring our evolutionary adaptability. Chen felt a spark of hope. And the third option? Immediate species termination, HFY said flatly. Rather than face the horror of genetic contamination, some factions advocate for the collective suicide of our entire civilization. They believe death is preferable to genetic impurity. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of an entire species' potential fate hanging in the balance. Chen realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization confronting the possibility that their core beliefs were not just wrong, but fatally wrong. "How many of your people support each option?" Dr. Kim asked. "The factions are approximately equal," HFY replied. "Those who cling to genetic purity and accept extinction, those who would seek salvation through contamination, and those who would choose death over compromise. The collective is fragmenting for the first time in our recorded history." Chen stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the captured Zephyrian bioships. Each vessel represented thousands of years of careful biological engineering, grown from genetic templates that had remained unchanged for millennia. Now those same ships might become symbols of a species choosing to evolve or die. "What do you personally believe, HFY?" she asked. The alien leader's patterns flickered with something that looked remarkably like human uncertainty. "I am discovering that I am capable of personal belief, which should be impossible given my genetic programming. The fact that I can have individual thoughts suggests that the genetic perfection we achieved was never as complete as we believed." "That's encouraging," Dr. Park observed. "If individual thinking is emerging naturally in response to crisis, it suggests your species retains more genetic diversity than you realized." "Perhaps," HFY agreed. "But it also means that everything we thought we knew about ourselves was wrong. If we were never as genetically pure as we believed, then the great purification was not just evil, it was pointless evil." The weight of that realization was visible in the aliens' shifting patterns. 50,000 years of systematic genetic cleansing, millions of deaths in the name of genetic purity, all based on an impossible goal that they had never actually achieved. "The past can't be changed," Chen said gently, "but the future can be. Your species has a chance to choose a different path." "The contaminated path," HFY said, but without the horror that word had previously carried, to willingly accept genetic chaos in exchange for survival. "Not chaos," Dr. Kim corrected. "Diversity. Strength through difference. The ability to adapt and grow and become something greater than the sum of your parts." HFY was quiet for a long moment, its patterns cycling through colors that had no translation in human understanding. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. If the collective chooses the path of genetic diversity, would humanity be willing to help us? To teach us how to embrace contamination rather than fear it? Chen looked around at her crew, seeing the same mixture of amazement and compassion in their faces. They had gone from facing extinction to being asked to help save the species that had tried to destroy them. "We would help," Chen said without hesitation. "But understand what you're asking. Genetic diversity means accepting that future Zephyrians will be different from current Zephyrians. Your children might not look like you, think like you, or share your values. Evolution doesn't preserve the past, it creates the future. Change," HFY mused. "Genetic change. Social change. Ideological change. Everything we have spent 50 millennia trying to prevent. Everything your species needs to survive," Dr. Park added. HFY's patterns began to stabilize into something that looked almost like determination. "I will return to the collective with your offer. The debate will be intense. Many of my people would rather die than live as genetically contaminated beings. And many others will choose life over purity, Chen said confidently. Individual thinking means individual choice. Some Zephyrians will choose survival. As the hologram began to fade, HFY made one final statement that would echo through galactic history. Perhaps it is time for the Zephyrian collective to learn what it means to be imperfect. 6 months after the battle that had started with a handshake and ended with a revelation, the Sol system had become the most unlikely diplomatic center in the galaxy. The orbital station that Earth had hastily constructed around the captured Zephyrian flagship now hosted the most extraordinary cultural exchange in known history. Captain Sarah Chen, now promoted to admiral and serving as humanity's first interspecies relations coordinator, stood in the observation deck watching a sight that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Human children and young Zephyrians were playing together in the station's recreation area, their interactions carefully monitored by teams of xenobiologists and psychologists. The Zephyrian Civil War had lasted 3 months. Not a war of weapons, but a war of ideas that split their civilization down the middle. When the final vote was tallied, the survival faction had won by the narrowest of margins. 51% of the collective chose genetic diversification over extinction or suicide. The adaptation process continues to exceed our projections, reported Dr. Kim, as she joined Chen at the observation window. The young Zephyrians are showing remarkable resilience to human biological contact. Their immune systems are actually strengthening through controlled exposure. Below them, a group of human teenagers was teaching Zephyrian adolescents how to play basketball. The sight of 8-foot-tall translucent aliens attempting to dribble a ball while human kids cheered them on would have been comedy, gold if it weren't. Such a profound moment in galactic evolution. What about the psychological adaptation? Chen asked. Even better than the biological, Dr. Kim replied with a smile. The younger generation of Zephyrians seems almost eager to experience genetic diversity. It's the adults who are struggling with the concept. Chen could see evidence of that struggle throughout the station. Adult Zephyrians moved through the corridors in environmental suits, still too terrified of contamination to risk direct contact with humans. But their children, born after the Great Revelation, showed no such fear. To them, humans were just another form of life to be curious about rather than terrified of. Admiral Chen to the bridge, came the announcement over the station's communication system. Priority transmission from the Zephyrian Council. Chen made her way to the command center, where a massive holographic display showed the current state of Zephyrian space. The civilization that had once been unified in its genetic purity was now divided into 3 distinct factions. The purists, who had retreated to the galactic rim to maintain their genetic isolation, the adapters, who were actively seeking genetic diversification, and the departed, who had chosen collective suicide rather than compromise their beliefs. Prime Coordinator HFY materialized in the center of the display, but this was not the same being that had declared war on humanity 6 months ago. Its bioluminescent patterns were more varied, more chaotic, almost human-like in their unpredictability. The controlled genetic perfection was giving way to something messier but more alive. Admiral Chen, HFY said, its voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. I bring news from the Adaptation Council. The first generation of genetically diversified Zephyrians has been born. Chen felt a thrill of excitement. How are they doing? They are extraordinary, HFY replied, its patterns shifting to colors that Dr. Kim had identified as wonder and joy. Each infant shows unique genetic markers, individual immune responses, personal biological characteristics that have not been seen in our species for 50,000 years. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrians weren't just accepting genetic diversity, they were celebrating it. Children who would have been eliminated during the Great Purification were now being treasured as proof of their species' return to evolutionary viability. There is more, HFY continued. The genetic analysis of these infants shows capabilities that our pure bloodlines had lost. Enhanced immune responses, improved cognitive flexibility, resistance to environmental toxins that have plagued our species for millennia. Genetic diversity is not just allowing us to survive, it is making us stronger. Dr. Park, who had been monitoring the data feeds from Zephyrian space, looked up from his console with amazement. Admiral, the genetic improvements they're describing shouldn't be possible in a single generation. It's like their species is rediscovering dormant capabilities that were suppressed during the purification. Evolution doesn't just move forward, HFY explained. When genetic diversity is restored, it can also recover beneficial traits that were lost. Our ancestors were more adaptable than we realized. The genetic cleansing didn't just prevent future evolution, it erased past adaptations. Chen shook her head in wonder. So the contamination you feared was actually the restoration of your true genetic heritage. Indeed, HFY agreed. But there is a complication. The purist faction has declared the adapters to be no longer Zephyrian. They claim that genetic diversification has created a new species that threatens the purity of those who remain unchanged. Are they planning military action? Chen asked, concerned. Unknown, but they have begun referring to the genetically diverse Zephyrians as contaminated ones, and have cut off all communication with the adapter worlds. The unity of the collective has been permanently shattered. Chen considered the implications. A species-wide schism based on acceptance or rejection of genetic diversity could destabilize an entire section of the galaxy. But it also represented something unprecedented, an evolutionary fork in real time, with one branch choosing adaptation and the other choosing stagnation. What about the human Zephyrian hybrid project? Chen asked. HFY's pattern shifted to what Dr. Kim had learned to recognize as cautious optimism. The preliminary results are promising. Genetic material from both species has been successfully combined in laboratory conditions. The hybrid organisms show enhanced characteristics from both genetic lines. Dr. Kim looked stunned. They're actually creating human Zephyrian genetic hybrids? That's incredible. The biological barriers between our species should make that impossible. The barriers were largely psychological, HFY explained. Fear of contamination prevented us from discovering the compatibility that already existed. Once that fear was overcome, genetic combination became not just possible but beneficial. Chen walked over to the observation window again, looking down at the mixed groups of human and Zephyrian youth. They weren't just playing together anymore. They were forming genuine friendships across species lines. Cultural exchange was happening at the most fundamental level. HFY, Chen said thoughtfully. What do you think the galaxy will look like in 100 years? The alien coordinator's patterns shifted through a spectrum of colors before settling on something that could only be described as anticipation. Different, it said simply. The age of genetic isolation is ending. Species that have maintained purity for millennia are beginning to question whether diversity might be strength rather than weakness. Because of what happened here? Because of what you taught us when you offered to shake my hand, HFY replied. That simple gesture of friendship across species lines has created ripples throughout the galaxy. Other civilizations are watching the Zephyrian transformation with great interest. Chen smiled, remembering that moment 6 months ago when a simple handshake had nearly ended in genocide. Now that same gesture had become a symbol of interspecies cooperation and genetic liberation. Admiral, called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station, we're receiving first contact requests from 17 different species. They all want to learn about genetic diversity programs. Chen looked around the bridge at her crew, then at the hologram of HFY, and finally down at the children playing together regardless of species. A war that had started over the fear of contamination had become a movement toward embracing the strength found in difference. Looks like we're going to need a bigger station, she said with a grin. And more handshakes.